Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to give it just a second as we have people join us. It is right at 6:30, so thank you for being on time. As usual, if you've been here with the Autism Society before, we are taking questions through our chat. So if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat and we will get to as many as possible. We have an exciting night tonight. My name is Beth Burt. I am the Executive Director of the Autism Society Inland Empire. And tonight we've got a great panel to discuss autism in college. I know we've got some people out there that are thinking about college. We've got some people that will be attending college in the fall, and tonight's a great night that we've got our experts to share their own experiences to help you maybe avoid some of the pitfalls and get some tips for making college as successful as possible. So thanks again for joining us. We'll give it just a second more and we'll go ahead and start. I'm going to give it just a second. While we're waiting, why don't you make sure you put anything in the chat as far as questions you might have about tonight. We are leaving time at the end for questions, so we do want to get to as many of those as possible. Okay, it looks like we've slowed down, so we're going to go ahead and start. We're going to start with Amy Wilms. Amy is, and I'm going to mess up your title, Amy, so I'm going to have you introduce yourself. But Amy has been a speaker in the past. She's got many years of experience with student services and has a heart for serving the neurodiverse community. So I'm really happy that she's here tonight to talk about some of the experiences she's had and share her experience. So thank you, Amy, for joining us.
Sure. Okay, so let's go ahead.
Yep,
okay.
Go ahead. I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. And I have a fair amount of things that I want to make sure that I mention to you, and I will try not to go too quickly. But if you do have questions, please, like Beth said, please put them in the chat and would be happy to answer them. My background, just so you know, is that I actually have a master's in college student personnel or post-secondary education from the University of Maryland, College Park. My undergrad degree is in communication arts from a small college in Pennsylvania. And I have been out here in California for, gosh, almost 30 years, I think. And I have been most recently, I just took a new position at Vanguard University in Costa Mesa, California. Previous to that, I was working at the University of Redlands in Redlands, California. And I have worked in the field of disability services since, I think, 2009, I think, and have been doing this for a good while. I don't presume to be an expert by any means, so I'm going to tell you my experience, which is going to be from the private and small college campus. So I will be able to mention some things relative to state and community colleges, but that my experience is solely in private. I have some things that I just wanted to share with you briefly with regard to what you're thinking about in terms of attending a college or even perhaps selecting a college. So I'll go on a couple of those things. And so one of my initial questions that I wanted to ask you to be thinking about, and you might be already thinking about these things that I mentioned, is, first of all, do you want to attend a community college, a state school, or a private? And I think that is a very important question. There are a lot of reasons to choose one or the other, and those are obviously usually personal and individual to each student and what might be best for them. One of the other questions that I have with regard to that is whether or not you want to live on campus or whether you want to live at home. So be thinking about those kinds of questions. there are options for either to occur. And one of the questions that you might ask if a student wants to live on campus is, what does that situation look like? And what would be your housing circumstance? Rooming with someone, a single room, things of that nature. So other things to be thinking about is, and this is, I will highly, highly recommend that you visit the campuses and do a campus tour. The reason I suggest that is I do think that it makes a difference to come to campus and see what that feels like. There are times when it's really good to go. I think it's not a bad idea to go when college classes are in session, so you can kind of see what the feel of the campus is, interactions with people, possibly going to a class that a professor is going to teach in an area of your interest. I would also recommend doing a campus tour, and while you're on campus, that you schedule an appointment to meet with the Disability Services Office or Accessibility Resources, whatever their name is. You want to ask admissions about setting up a time to meet with that professional in the office. And that makes a huge difference because you want to talk with them about the accommodations that are needed. And that's also in concert with what has been in your 504 plan or your IEP, and to talk about what might change, because there will be some things that will change and will not automatically transfer from high school to college. Each school can provide accommodations differently. And by that, I mean, it might be that they might have a volunteer note taker scenario. They might have digital note taking options and applications that you can use, things of that nature. So you do want to ask about those accommodations. And sometimes students are, they're very usually actively involved. The expectation is that the students, the responsibility for disclosure and having conversations with faculty is now up to the student. There isn't an IEP team on the college level. There are some semblances of that, you know, but not like what has been known and what you've experienced in high school. You want to ask about the accommodations that that you have had as a student and in high school, and ask what might change at that college. And common examples of accommodations might be, extended time on exams, a quiet testing room, audiobooks, note takers, things of that nature, possible intermittent departures from class. If you need a movement break or need to deal with a level of frustration, you might want to take a short walk, probably 5 to 10 minutes, things like that. So those are kinds of things that you can talk about with the disability services professional at the schools you visit. And then accommodations that are not common in college would be things like tutoring. That may have been something that was provided in high school, but tutoring is not an accommodation at the college level. Retaking exams is not typical. Other things that are going to be a case-by-case basis and not automatic would be extended time on assignments potentially, and also the potential of flexible attendance. Those are, again, they're not automatic because both of those sort of relate to what's considered a course modification. And so one of the reasons I wanted to mention that is that the laws change somewhat when you go to college. And so the law that works with and provides jurisdiction and support for 504 plans and IEPs is IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That law terminates when you graduate from high school. So it does not automatically transfer. What IDEA sets up for students in high school is that it needs to guarantee, high schools, K-12 systems need to guarantee success. The law that shifts is, is ADA. 504, section 504 is applicable both in the K-12 system and in the college system, but we shift to ADA, and what ADA then needs colleges to do is to guarantee access, which is different than success, obviously. So even with accommodations, it is possible that a student may not pass an exam or a class. The other thing that's very important to know, and this is where course modification sometimes gets into the mix, is that accommodations cannot compromise the academic standard of a student's major or program or class that they take. The other final thing just to know is that if a student didn't start accommodations at the beginning of a term, a quarter or a semester, the accommodations are not retroactive to the beginning of the term. They actually will start at the time the student goes to disability services and provides documentation to set up accommodations in college. So it is very important to think about making sure that you try to start that at the beginning of the semester. Again, as I mentioned, the responsibility primarily shifts to the student. It's a new system of accommodations when we get to college. And so now the student is the one responsible to disclose and share information to disability services. A very important thing that you want to think about is that when you go to admissions and say you were to possibly give admissions your documentation, that is not necessarily likely to get to the disability services office. So if you also happen to have physical medical conditions, for example, or even mental health conditions, if you share that information with the health center or the counseling center, that is not going to make it to disability services. Those things are not automatically shared because of the different laws, FERPA, HIPAA, confidentiality law. Those things will not share information with one another unless you as the student set that up so that that can be shared. So my recommendation is that if you're interested in a college, I would send documentation directly to the disability services office, in addition to any others you might want to share it with, if you choose.
Amy,
Yes, ma'am.
this is great information. Can you slow down just a smidgen so the interpreter can keep up with you?
Absolutely. I cannot see the interpreter. I so apologize. Thank you.
No, you're doing great. This is wonderful information, but thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, so let me try to go a little slower. I apologize to our interpreter. Okay, where was I? Okay, documentation does need to be provided. And one of the important pieces that is important to know is that because the 504 and the IEP technically terminate at graduation from high school, if there is additional information such as a psychoeducational evaluation or a triennial for that part of it, you want to get the most recent copy of that information to the disability services office. In part, sometimes that's because on an IEP or a 504, diagnoses are important for disability services offices at the college level, and that isn't always included. A lot of times what really is focused on in those plans is the accommodations that are the accommodations which are provided for students in the K-12 system. So the psych ed evaluation is also very important. If it is a mental health or a medical condition, then that would it would be helpful to have a letter from the medical professional or the mental health professional discussing the diagnoses and possible impacts and maybe possible recommended academic accommodations that would be helpful for the student. The professional does not need to know for sure, but they might say, based on history and what I know of your student, here's what would be helpful for you. So that's information to be thinking about in terms of what needs to be shared with the disability services offices. The other very important fact that you want to know is that that information is not shared with any other offices on campus. It is not shared with faculty. It is only kept housed in the disability services office. And if you want your diagnoses, for example, shared with a faculty member, I usually ask that the student give me that permission, and I often have them sit in my office with me to then approve what I send out in an email communication to a faculty member, and I often CC the student on an email so they are aware that this information is going out. So everybody is on the same page. But that's not a have to. It's only if that's something you feel is important to share with your faculty. Okay, other things to know, the student, the other big part of this is, I would say, the student becomes the primary self-advocate. And so this is sometimes not always easy to do. And so in the case of meeting with your professors, what we do at Vanguard, for example, is we have a letter of accommodation once those are officially set up with our office that we send to the student in an email. The student is then responsible to send that letter of accommodation to the faculty members. And what I really strongly push is that not only do you want to send that letter to your faculty member, but you want to set up an office hours appointment with your faculty member to discuss how you learn. You do not have to disclose diagnoses to anyone other than to disability services, but you do need, I think, to talk with faculty about how you learn and what's important in what could be a barrier for your learning. So for example, if your faculty member wrote notes all over a whiteboard and that's very confusing and it's hard to make sense of, then what I would recommend is asking, could you either share something in a PowerPoint, or can I take a picture of your notes on the board with my phone? Those kinds of things. You want to talk with faculty about how the barriers and things that might be challenging for you. Now, what that may mean is that you come up with a script for what you want to talk to your professor about. That is not always the easiest conversation to have if you've not done a lot of self-advocacy, or if that is hard for you to explain. So that is something that you and your parents can work on, or parents you can work on with your child as you prepare for going to college. Disability services can sometimes help with that if you want. So there is an expectation, and this is one of the biggest transition issues, I think, when going to college, is that there is more independence that is expected of the student. Faculty members are not always going to check up on making sure that work and reading is being done. So if you have to sign up to work with a tutor, for example, that means you need to get yourself to the meeting with your tutor. You need to put a message or reminder in your phone, things of that nature. The other thing that I think is important to think about is that the class time is generally longer than what you have had in high school. Typically, classes are going to start at about an hour and a half, 90 minutes. Or if it's an evening class and it meets once a week, that's often a 2 hour and 50-minute or 3 hour class. Those classes also tend to meet 2 or 3 times a week. If it's a 3 hour class, that's the class that's going to meet just typically once a week. Typically other devices like cell phones, they may not be allowed to be turned on in class. If this is something that you're particularly wed to, that might be something where it's in a syllabus that the faculty member shares with their class about what is and is not allowed. So you do want to be thinking about things like that. The other thing I would say about classes and the independence factor that is fairly important is time management, organization, procrastination. These are all typical challenges for most students. And for some of us, it's a little more challenging. And so it's helpful to see when you talk to disability services, if there is something at their school, like an academic success coach, a peer mentor, or things of that nature, where we have student workers on our campus who can help with scheduling things in your calendar or having a paper calendar, when you can see where your exams are, how many of your exams, you can plot it out on a monthly calendar, for example. So those are important things to be thinking about. Or do you want to have someone that works privately with your child or son or daughter as they are preparing to go to college and deal with more independence? Faculty and administrators are typically not going to check in and check up to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. This is largely going to fall to you and whatever system you can set up. So grades also, I think for parents, this is probably, I apologize, my earpiece keeps falling out. Grades are not necessarily shared on a daily basis. So this is something I know that I think the K-12 system has something where you can even sometimes check in daily. If not, that's automatic for you to be able to do. So it is difficult to sometimes know how a student is performing in the class. That's another reason I suggest office hours meetings with faculty to check in. You can always send them an email to say, hey, how am I doing? If those things are not readily available to you on the learning system, sometimes there are things like Blackboard or Moodle or Canvas. If you're familiar with any of those systems, those are typically what are used by college professors to share information. But faculty don't always post grades, I have to be honest and tell you that. So That I think is another thing to be aware of. So those are just a couple of quick sets of thoughts, couple final things, and then I'm done. I'll shush, and then you guys can ask questions if you want. Is thinking about just lifestyle things. Does your student know how to manage their money, do laundry, keep their rooms clean, those type of life skills behaviors? Social skills are also an important aspect of that. How well do I get to know students and make friends? How easily do you get around campus? Is it important to think about mapping out and taking a walk of the campus, finding out what buildings are the classroom buildings? And when you get your schedule, is it helpful to walk around campus and see and find your buildings and know where your classroom is before you start actually going to classes? And another area to think about is the dining hall and navigating that. So if a lot of people at heavy lunch open time when all the classes have dismissed, maybe that's not the best time to go to lunch. It could be, but you can always check in with dining halls to find out when high traffic times are so that you can maybe look at a time that's not as busy if that is sometimes a challenge. The final thing I would say, and then I'm done, is just thinking about and when I talked about the number of classes that you take, I forgot to say that the typical number of classes that a college student can take is anywhere from between 3 and 5 classes. If you're in a music major, they often have more classes because of ensembles and choirs and symphonies, things of that nature. So do you want to take a full schedule? Can you take more than 12 units? If you need to take a smaller amount of classes, it may be that you'll need to think about whether or not a 5 or a 6-year plan for completing your degree is something you want to think about and decide if that's an option or a possibility for you. I think those are most of my questions. So I'll shush or questions, my statements and things of that nature to be helpful to you. I know there's going to be a time for Q&A later. And if I did go too fast for anyone, including the interpreter, please don't hesitate to re-ask a question or say, Amy, you mentioned this, but can you repeat that? I'm happy to do that.
Amy, you did an amazing job. That was a lot of information. Where were you when I needed you 10 years ago? So that was great.
Yeah.
One of the questions we had is, can you suggest any scholarship opportunities for students with disabilities specific to autism? I will say that we do have a list on our website, and I'll, when I send out the recording tomorrow, I'll make sure we include that link on the email so we can have that information out to families too.
Sure.
And of course, it depends what college you go to. We do have a local one for, I think, Crafton Hills and San Bernardino Valley College has a scholarship, and then Autism Society of California has a scholarship. There's a few others out there, so we can let people know. Are there any other questions specific now, or we can wait until our next speakers go? I'm checking. I see Andrew. Hi, Andrew, in the chat, just to make sure. All right, let's move on. Dr. Gail Shoffey. Did I say it right? Dr. Gail, I've known you like 2 years and I always mess up your last name because you're just Dr. Gail.
Shoffey.
Shoffey, I still messed it up. One day. Okay. So next up is Dr. Gail Shoffey. I'm going to let her introduce herself and talk a little bit about her experience. Dr. Gail is one of our fabulous panel of advisors, and we are happy to have her here tonight. So I'm going to make you the spotlight and let you take it away.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. Let me start off by saying that if you're going to college, you know, let's not kid around, you're smart, right? And I want to help you with some advice and practical tips to academic success. Hi. My name is Dr. Gail Shoffey. I'm a doctor of computer science. I had a high school diploma in my 20s. And when I was around 40, I decided to go back to school. And I found out I had an aptitude for programming software. I worked my way up through the university studies to receive my doctorate in the pandemic in 2020. Let's talk about knowledge, okay? Are we born with knowledge? No, just instincts. Our knowledge depends on first our parents, then the school systems, and then finally what we search for on our own, such as coming to this webinar. I'm autistic. I have experiences with navigating the school disability support system, overcoming some ASD, autism spectrum disorder, ASD challenges, and I have some practical advice for your schoolwork. First of all, the disability support system. The University Disability Office has the paperwork that you need to fill out to request accommodations. What I thought might be most helpful is I'm going to share with you my accommodations from my last university. So it was written 7 things that get sent to every instructor. I have 3 days of additional time on individual projects. I had additional time for exams and quizzes. I have double the time allotted. I had additional time for what's called discussion boards, whatever the makeup of your school is. Mine had discussion boards, so I would get 2 extra days. I got hard copies of the textbooks. I got PDFs that were compatible with the screen reader. So when it was available, I requested compatible PDFs. Closed captioning services, like if you have a online live class, live chat, just like here, we've got closed captioning. So I request closed captioning. And the last thing that was written was that hard copies of the textbook that I'm using, I may request it to go to a third party as well, meaning somebody who's tutoring me, such as like, I'm a tutor right now, and you taking a class. You want me to have the same book you have, so I can help you navigate. The additional request that I had was I made sure that all the instructors, when I did introduce myself, that I had the additional request that I need sometimes a secondary method of delivery of directions. For example, if it's all written, I might not understand all the words because it might include fluff. I just may not understand. I want to hear it. I want to have a conversation with the teacher to explain to me what they are, and vice versa. If it was oral, I want to have a written copy. Helps me. So some of the we'll talk about some of the challenges for brick and mortar school. I recommend that you visit as often as you can to the location so that you can feel comfortable. I need you to recognize that when you start school, you have to give your body some time to get used to that extra activity. Because as autistics, we have so many spoons. You all know the spoon theory, right? Well, we only have so many spoons. You have to save some of those spoons to use them for school. I recommend you sit in the front so that you have less distractions in front of you, no people. Have a plan where to go if you're feeling overwhelmed. Like if there isn't already a designated place, like there are in some museums and different places, they have places for autistics. I don't know what your school will have. At least be prepared with mentally a place where you can go, where you can decompress if you feel overwhelmed, even in the bathroom or the car. You know, come up with a safe place for you to go. And give yourself like 10 minutes before class starts to organize your papers and get yourself prepared to start with the talking right away. Okay, and at the end, give yourself 10 minutes to make sure that you go over any instructions that you had and you're clear on what your homework is. And for online classes, just don't wait for the deadline to submit your work. Really, okay? And lastly, some practical advice. When I start a new class, I will contact the professor, and I do disclose I'm autistic, and that's where I take the opportunity to tell them, aside from the accommodations which they receive, I wanted to make sure that I also got that double method of delivery of school directions, like class work. I used color coding highlight markers for different classes. I used different colors for different classes. That kind of helped me focus, because this class was a yellow class and this class is a pink class, and I would use any of the assistive software that you need. That's for sure. You know, because like when I use the reader, I read along while the reader reads to me. It helps me a lot. I guess one last thing might be that there's also software that's going to help you write your papers. Software like Grammarly, which your school may provide for you. And that's pretty much it, I think, Beth.
Those were great tips. Boy, thank you so much, Dr. Gail. I appreciate it. I hope people were taking notes. Glad we're recording it just in case. So thank you. All right, Imari, I'm gonna pull you up and then we can take some questions. So Dr. Imari, let's see if I mess up your name, Nicoloff. Did I say it right?
That's correct, yes.
Hey, I did 1 out of 3, okay. So Imari, we are also so grateful for you to be here tonight as well. As Dr. Gail, Imari is part of our panel of advisors, so we're very happy to have her. Imari, do you want to give a little bit of background about your Dr. Nicoloff? A little bit about your background and the work you're doing now, just your kind of school background.
Sure. Like Beth said, my name is Dr. Imari Nicoloff. I have a doctorate in counseling psychology. It's a doctorate in education. So essentially, I was an athlete in high school, and so I ended up at a junior college playing volleyball. So I did that for 2 years, and then I ended up at a larger four-year university, which didn't necessarily work out so well. So after the four-year university, I went back to a private college, Chapman University, and that worked a lot better for me, smaller class sizes and things of that nature. So that's where I received my bachelor's and my master's. My master's degrees in special education. So that was I chose not to teach, but I do have that master's degree in special education. So what I do is I work as an advocate or an educational consultant for special needs, mostly children, some young adults, but all in the K through 12 system. And after Chapman, I went ahead and went to another a not-for-profit school, which is it's sort of like University of Phoenix, but it was called Argosy University, and that's where I received my doctorate. So that was challenging too. So I kind of have experiences with JC, and then an actual four-year, and then a private school also. So with those experiences, I've learned a little bit in terms of I'm not quite as organized as Dr. Gail is. It's just one of my things as a person with autism. Organization is actually a struggle for me, so I have to try extra hard to make things make sense for me, so that I can that I was successful in college. One thing that I will mention that is kind of off the grid is that what I've done is I do recognize that as we finish high school and do go into college, that the burden does kind of switch to us in order to to go to disability services and to let people know that we have special needs, quote unquote. um, and the one thing I will say is, while it is our does become our responsibility as a student, we'll also mention that it's really important to and it's a struggle for me, as I have autism also, as speaking of as a person with autism. But it's important to just actually find, like Mr. Rogers would say, to find the helpers, the people who who support you as a person with autism, going to a secondary school. For me, I found a professor who uh, was very welcoming for me, and so even though I only, I went to class with him one semester, he helped me out throughout my college career in terms of doing things, that helping me with understanding. I'm not very good at math, and so math was required for me to to get my degree. And so he made himself available to me, and I think it's really important to take advantage of those people who are willing to help you, and even have like a support person, whether it's a parent or someone that actually attends, that may go to disability services with you, or that sort of thing. I just find that I found that very helpful. So I'm sorry that this is like sort of disorganized, because that's how my brain is, but
Oh,
that's kind of my story, my situation, and how I
perfect.
was able to make it through.
Don't be sorry. This is great, Imari. So I'll ask you questions, and if you don't feel comfortable, you always can say no. Did you ask for accommodations through the disabled students office? Is that something that you utilized in your college career?
Yes, actually I did, because when I got to Argosy, things started getting a lot more difficult, and so I required some extra time on some not exams, but just some papers and stuff. And so I did go to this, it was still called Student Services for us at Argosy, and I did end up providing a letter that I'm more than willing to share. I just have to line out a few identifying characteristics, but a letter from a psychologist that I'd been seeing. And so she sent the letter in an effort for me to have some accommodations in terms of the increased amount of time for assignments. I believe that was, and then testing. I was able to test in a different area, not in a quiet room, not necessarily with the other students. So yes, I did I did I did do that, but it was based on what was being asked by the university, and so I just was able to provide that, and they were granted after they considered the psychologist's documentation.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to open this up to all three of you guys, Dr. Gail and Amy, because I love this conversation. And one of the questions that I have, and people can keep submitting your questions in the chat, is the question around when you had additional time on your exams. Did you have to, because I know some colleges, especially junior colleges, will make the student have to go to disabled student services a week before the test and arrange for that. And there's a lot of organization that has to get done before you can even take the test, which sometimes can be a challenge. Was that your experiences when you had the extra time on the test, or was it pretty simple? Or I understand it tends to vary from college to college. I don't know who wants to talk about that.
Well, just oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gail.
I was just going to speak up and say that that all the work that I had extra time on was all computer based. So having extra time was computer based. I didn't have to have those kinds of accommodations. Beth.
Okay. So Imari or Amy, do you want to talk about that?
Imari, you can, and then I'll add something.
Sure. In my experience was that it was a little rocky in the beginning at first, but once the another thing I wanted to mention is it becomes a different ball game, because professors are usually given their ability to decide what sort of, not necessarily law-breaking accommodations versus, like I'm also a diabetic, so there are certain accommodations that I receive for that based on things becoming a life or death circumstance. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more about their lectures and that sort of thing. They're usually given the ability, and I don't know, Amy, you probably know more about this, but they're usually given their ability to determine, to decide if, you're able to audio record or not. And oftentimes I found that professors weren't allowing students to audio record, so it became kind of interesting for me. I had to rely more on the notes that were that were given to us, instead of being able to sort of read or review something based on a recording. So that was interesting, and a change from when I was in high school, because I was automatically given the information from professors, but it became a little different. So I know that was kind of off topic, but it's definitely a challenge once you kind of graduate from high school and enter into the college situation, that you make sure that you're able to find a way to understand what's being taught to you, if in the event that the professor doesn't allow recording.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
Amy?
what I would say is that with regard to the scheduling aspect that Beth brought up, that is an important thing to think about. And so when I mentioned working with a peer mentor or an academic success coach, or maybe even, your parents or that helper that Imari talked about, that may be someone that can help you sit down to schedule those tests and things of that nature. Most colleges will have some type of advance notice requirement. And so it is important to find out what that is at your institution and how that process works. In most cases, the student also needs to remind their professor that if you are testing in a quiet testing area, which most of our offices tend to provide, that you'll need to remind the professor to send the exam to Disability Services so we can have it ready for you when you arrive. And so that does require some planning and some time management that you can work out with whoever that helper is. If it's your parent, if it's an aide that the Department of Rehab has supported you with, that kind of thing would be what I would recommend. And I think to Dr. Gale's point about that time management and that schedule that you need to create, this can be part of that schedule that you put together when you think about what your daily or weekly routines are relative to your exams.
Hey, Amy, can you address, Imari brought up that really important point. Thank you, Imari, about professors don't always follow, and what are the repercussions, or, what are the rights? Because a lot of parents are used to having all the, IDEA rights and abilities for due process. And then in college, you get a professor who says, well, I don't care what
Right.
your accommodations are, you can't take a picture of this, or you can't audio record in my class.
Right.
What then?
That's a fair question. And I will tell you, I will tell you that I think that is not always an automatic answer and an easy one. We have some professors who are not always willing. So a couple of things. What's really important is, yes, we cannot necessarily be denied accommodations, but at the same time, I think I mentioned it previously in my remarks, was that accommodations cannot compromise the standard of the program or the major that you're in, or even the class potentially. So, and that can be a case-by-case determination based on what the standards of the class are. But in a thing, so I'll put that out there. To get to the audio recording, for example, some professors are very nervous about that. Recording has been misused. In some cases, professors have unfortunately had very negative experiences where things were taken out of context and they were assumed to have said something that actually was not the case. So there has been some nervousness about that, but ADA does support this as if the student has a demonstrated need for that accommodation, then Disability Services has to go to work that out with the faculty member, or take it up to the department chair, or even, higher up to address the need that the student has. So it's a complicated question. I would say there's not a simple answer to each of those necessarily. And then you have other faculty members who are going to be super supportive. They will be very happy to allow a student to record, that kind of thing. So it is a case-by-case situation. In many cases, And that's another reason I think to have that office hours meeting to talk with your faculty members about the accommodations and to see if they have any questions. Because in some cases, faculty are still learning, how this process works as well. And so in my opinion, it's an opportunity for you to educate them on how, in this case, autism impacts you. Because when you meet with one, I heard this phrase and I think it's absolutely true. When you meet one person with autism, you meet one person with autism. So to that person, I did see something in the questions Q&A about, are all accommodations the same for individuals with ASD? I would say no, because it's case by case, it's person by person. Sometimes audiobooks are going to work for individuals and sometimes they're not. So it really does depend. And I use that as just one example. So, those kinds of things will be something that I think are important to address with your disability services office and also with the professors.
Amy, I wanted to ask a question. Let me get Tiffany's question answered. Do you know any community colleges that have great disability support department and is a good school for gaming and animation? I know Norco Community College has a lot of experience with individuals with autism, and I believe have a gaming and animation program. I can't say that I recommend them because I don't know them enough, but I do know that they have a lot of experience. So let me go back to what you were talking about, Amy, as far as walking into disabled students' office, and this is for Dr. Gail and Imari as well. My experience is they're going to ask you, they're going to look at the report, and then they're going to ask you, all right, what accommodations do you need? Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you're, just graduated from high school and you've never taken a college class, the first response is, I don't know, because I've never taken a class. So what advice would you give to individuals out there that are going to be graduating soon? How do they broach that question? How do they know what they're going to need right off the bat? How are they going to answer that question?
Dr. Gail or Imari, do you want to answer first?
Sure. I would definitely do my own research on what other people have requested. I would see what accommodations are available and in place already at the school. And with all that, I would discern what would help me with my needs.
Yeah, great answer.
Mari, do you have a suggestion?
Unfortunately, I don't, but I mean, I kind of do. Just kind of what I did is I went with what I sort of found helpful in high school, and then sort of just translated into into some short. I just prepared like a few notes prior to going in, and just I indicated, probably, more time if allowed on assignments and that sort of thing. And, a note taker or to be provided notes if that was possible. So I just honestly, initially, I just sort of guessed and just went with what was happening prior. And then once I was able to feel it out a little more, I recognized, yeah, I'm gonna need, to do these tests on my own, and some other things that were helpful in terms of time management and helping me with that sort of thing. But it was definitely trial and error initially, which I know unfortunately isn't a hard and fast answer, but the other thing is you sort of start to kind of find a groove once you get started with your accommodations and what you think your needs are, and then you can always change it up as it goes. I mean, go back into disability services and say, you know, I've thought about this, or I've experienced this, and this is what I want. So don't be afraid to, you know, maybe even make mistakes, you know, initially. Just provide as much information as you have, and then sort of feel it out a little if possible.
Mhm. So the one thing I would say is that a lot of times I've had students and their families come in and they ask, what kind of accommodations can you provide me? I'll be very honest and say my first question back to you is, so tell me what you've had as far as accommodations in your school. So whether it was a previous college or whether it was in high school, and then I will talk through the accommodations that you had in high school or at your other college. And then I'll ask you, do you feel like you need all of those same accommodations? Is there something, you know, that kind of thing? I'll ask those interactive questions. The other thing I would say is to Imari's point, if you said to me, for example, let's use the hypothetical of audiobooks. Well, I never really needed to use them in high school, although it's supported in your documentation and you might have used them in your IEP. But then you get into the semester or the quarter and things are going too quickly and you're like, yeah, I think I really could use, you know, audiobooks, and I didn't put it in place initially. I would always say to you, come in and let us know. And we can either put it in place as an additional accommodation for you in that term, or we can do it the next semester. If you toughed it out and went through the full term and then said, I need that, then let's talk about it. And then let's revisit that conversation. Also to Imari's points, sometimes it is exploration. Sometimes you will find that college is a very different environment than high school. And so it does mean that I would tell you, to be fair and honest, I think it'll be a little bumpy at first because you do need to try to figure it out. And you can know certain parts of it, but you're not going to know what the actual experience of college is until you get there. And so that is where we can allow for experimentation and exploration and time to figure it out.
I love that. That's a great answer. So if, let's say, you know, we had accommodations, I had accommodations in, and they weren't working. And, you know, Dr. Gail mentioned like the Dragon software, or let's say I needed a note taker. Then I could say, hey, I didn't have this in high school. I'm halfway through the semester, but I think I need some additional support. That's where Disabled Students Office could maybe come in and talk through some of the options with me and get the accommodations added.
Yes, it's always so the other thing to know as students and family members or supportive significant others in your life, there is always room for a conversation and an interaction. The interactive process at the college level is very, very important in determining what accommodations are going to work best for you. And it isn't something that I think we can reasonably expect you to fully know and to fully understand until you get into the college system. And Imari has been at very different types of places, both online, small, you know, and big, you know, state schools, I think, if I got that right, Imari. So those are very different worlds. And the accommodations that you might need environmentally even sometimes can change. So I would say definitely allow for that. And we want to have that interactive conversation that I think will help us decide what is the best combination of accommodations for you.
Well, believe it or not, we are at the end of our hour. That went by super fast. That was a great conversation. So thank you, ladies. I appreciate all of you being so willing to share your experience, and hopefully we've helped launch some new students in higher education for next year. This will be a great resource. I will be sending out the recording as well as some of the resources we talked about, scholarships and some of the resources that we have on our website for, I think we have some college coaches, and just any information we have about college we'll be happy to send. So you can see the thank yous that are coming in, but thank you all for sharing your hour with us. this evening, and we hope you have a wonderful
Espero que tengan
2023.
un maravilloso 2023.
Oh, that's our interpreter. And thank you to Portino, our interpreter.
Thank you. I apologize for that.
That's all right. We appreciate you. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Tengan
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
buenas noches para todos. Gracias.